All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the new year. Excited to be here. Appreciate everyone, as always, spending time and the great coverage that you continue to provide all of our student athletes, our programs. I hope that as you spend some time in the building and around our student athletes, our coaches, you can sense the energy in the air across the campus. Every year, of course, brings a sense of renewal as the students arrive back, and certainly that feeling is carried through with our student athletes. We had a chance last night to have our annual all-student athlete meeting. It's really the only time throughout the year that we get all 500 athletes in one room. We bring them in onto the floor of State Farm Center and have a chance to reconnect with them, let them see and be around one another. As most of you have seen, we're already 2-0 on the young season. We're undefeated. Soccer had two great wins to start the year, gotten us started on the right foot. This week, we'll start ramping up. Volleyball has their first competition. Obviously, the big football game on Saturday, cross country, I believe, has their first competition September 1st. And so we're off and running literally here in the fall and looking forward to a great season. Just wanted to touch base, make myself available this morning. Obviously, we had a big announcement last week out of the Big Ten Conference on our media deals. I won't get into the specifics. I'll assume that you guys have read those things, but happy to address any questions you might have. But needless to say, I think it just is a tremendous testament to the brand and reputation of the Big Ten Conference, the breadth of this league and the attractiveness of what's happening in the Big Ten and with our member institutions now from coast to coast. Excited about the visibility, the platforms that our student athletes will have access to as they put on our uniform and now travel around the country to compete on behalf of the University of Illinois. Give a lot of credit to Commissioner Warren, our Big Ten staff, my colleagues across the conference. This is a negotiation that we had been preparing for a very long time. These are, as you would imagine, big deals to the conference, to each of the member schools. And so you don't just walk into this the day before and have a 5-minute meeting and then go and start meeting with the media companies. This is something we've been anticipating for quite a while, and hats off to everybody who was directly involved in it and bringing us across the finish line. Really proud to be associated with the league and looking forward to building stronger relationships with those partners. Obviously, most of them are people we've worked with previously, but there are some new names in the fold, most notably NBC. And so excited about getting to know them and spending time with them as we move forward to broadcast and shed great light on the wonderful things happening across the Big Ten Conference. So with that, I'll stop and open it up for any questions you guys might have.
Just from a practical standpoint, what does the new contract mean for you guys? What can you do? What will you be able to do later that you can't do now?
Well, I think it strikes a nice balance. Obviously, trying to continue to be traditional in the sense of the linear programming, the profiles of the networks that we're working with, the Foxes, CBSs, NBCs of the world. Big Ten Network, of course, is really the backbone of a lot of what we do. But it also starts to dip our toe into a more, perhaps a younger audience, an audience that's consuming our sports in a different way through the direct consumer streaming platforms, the things that we'll be doing with BTN Plus and now with the Peacock Network owned by NBC. Excited about that. I think from the department's perspective, certainly the financial benefits are meaningful. It will allow us to continue to be, I think, very stable in an uncertain environment. I will say on that front, I don't think that everyone should believe everything they read in terms of what the projections are. I don't think that the numbers will be quite where some have been reporting. It looks like things will start flat and then we'll start to move up gradually in future years. Again, incredibly excited about it, but we want to make sure that we manage expectations on that front as well.
Josh, what does athlete representation look like if and when they ask for a piece of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that as we all understand, we're living in a very dynamic, evolutionary time in college athletics. We talked about this at some length during the roundtable this summer. I think that we're continuing to evaluate the model, figure out how we can do this better, how we can develop sort of college athletics 2.0. What's this going to look like for the next 100 years? I think that if you were to talk to my colleagues, there's clearly an understanding that change is afoot, and what that change ultimately looks like is still very much to be determined. I know that there's an appetite from a lot of people to continue to provide additional benefits to the student athletes. What those benefits are, how they're formulated, is it true pay, or does it make them employees? Those are all things that I think are very much to be determined. But it all has to be put into the mix as we talk about conference realignment, as we talk about expansion of the CFP, as we talk about the future of the NCAA. That has to be another really important part of that overarching conversation. And I'm just really confident in the people who are having the discussion at this point to chart what that future course will look like.
Josh, I don't know if you knew when you got here if you'd be at the head of the athletic department when all these changes are happening. Have you had to evolve how you feel about athlete pay, NIL, things like that? Like, how have you had to kind of adapt?
Yeah, I think so. I think clearly the pace of change is just so accelerated at this point in time. So when I got here now almost 7 years ago, if you had told me, hey, this is where we're going to be or be headed 7 years later, it probably wasn't something that I had spent a lot of time really thinking critically about. But certainly I've made up for lost time here in the last several years and have thought a lot about these things. And like most people, or many people anyway, I think that my understanding of our system has certainly deepened. I think my understanding of the challenges and the opportunities that we're confronted with have evolved. And I think having a greater appreciation for where I think we can go and should go has certainly changed over time as well. And so it certainly is a different dynamic, a different landscape than it was in 2006, early 2016 when I got here. And what's exciting, though, I think, is both in this position and then across the Big Ten Conference to have a prominent voice in those discussions makes this a really exciting time for me as a professional.
You seem to have embraced the discussion about student athlete pay, NIL, all those things. Like, is that because you see the opportunity you could present to your athletic department?
I think that's one of the reasons. I think that as you look across the landscape, it's evident that change has to come. And I think it's a question of the process by which that change occurs. And what we've watched happen over the last decade are a lot of other people have started to dictate change to us, whether it's the courts or the state legislatures or even the media to an extent. And so I'm a big believer that we're at a position now where we should learn from what's happened over the last decade and be more proactive in some of our decision making. That's really hard to do because that kind of change comes with it inevitably challenge and struggle and trying to develop consensus even amongst 14 or soon to be 16 schools in the Big Ten, let alone say 65 or 69 in the Power 5 or the 130 in the FBS or 350 and all. Each of those, as you grow the pot in each case, there are more and more voices at the table, and it gets really hard for people to develop consensus around different concepts. And so there's the theory of what I think sounds like a really interesting possibility. But the reality of that is still presents, I think, a lot of challenging dynamics.
Josh, Brett Bielema starts his second year on Saturday. Can you just comment on the state of the program and where do you think it's headed?
Incredibly excited about the future of our football program. Really looking forward to this week, this season. I can't say enough good things about Coach Bielema, our coaching staff, our student athletes. They've had a tremendous offseason. They've put in an incredible amount of work. It's amazing what a difference a year makes just to be able to go out to training camp, practice. Everybody knows where to go. Everybody's using the same language. There are common expectations across the board. There's a level now of player accountability where the players understand the expectations. They're able to hold each other accountable for their performance. And so that's been really exciting to watch develop and grow. I think the young men in our program believe in themselves. They believe in their opportunity to go out and win every Saturday. I think as Coach says, and as we've often heard, you're going to respect every opponent. You're not going to fear any of them. And our football program right now, I think, embodies that. And looking forward to seeing them strap it up on Saturday and start to see how these ensuing Saturdays play out.
Josh, there was a lot of public relations quotes and language in the deal about trying to dominate Saturday from noon until the end of the night. I was curious if you've been given any indication about what the league feels like playing on Thursdays or Friday nights going forward in this new deal.
I don't think you'll see it dramatically different than what we've been doing here for the last 5 or 6 years. I think you'll still see some dipping of the toe into the Friday night thing the same way that we've done. Thursdays are highly, highly unusual. Obviously, we have one this year. That was something that we agreed to, and so that wasn't forced upon us. And so you'll still see some what they call special night events is in kind of the lingo of our television negotiations. You'll see some Friday nights. You'll see some unique things, I think, around Labor Day weekend. You'll see some things around Thanksgiving weekend, trying to take advantage of some of those off weeks, some week zero things I think are always exciting. But nothing, Saturday is always going to be our bread and butter. It's going to be the place that people are going to go to watch Big Ten football from 11 a.m. Central Time all the way through until it's time for them to go to bed. And then the great thing with these new partners is they're going to get up on Sunday, turn on their NFL games, and the same 3 networks that they watch Big Ten football on Saturday are going to be broadcasting NFL all day and hopefully talking about what a great day it was in the Big Ten the Saturday before.
What were the conversations made inside the conference about how the new media deal would maybe affect basketball, especially losing ESPN and maybe most of those games winding up on a streaming service?
Yeah, I wouldn't say most of those games. Certainly a portion of those games. Now we'll have about 20% of the overall men's basketball inventory across the conference will be on Peacock. Peacock is a growing platform. It's one that we're excited to work with. ESPN, of course, has been a tremendous partner of ours for a long time, almost 40 years. And I think that relationship will continue, and we're going to continue to have a lot of different intersecting points with ESPN. Obviously, ESPN's the broadcast partner of the Rose Bowl. They own many of the postseason bowl games. As most of you know, they put on a lot of special events. The Jimmy V Classic, which we play in this year in December, is an ESPN-owned event. A lot of our non-conference opponents, of course, are broadcast on ESPN. And so we'll continue to intersect with ESPN in a lot of different ways. But it was a discussion point. We all understand that as we go through a negotiation like this, there are advantages and disadvantages to each and every partner that we considered. We recognize the prominent brand that ESPN has in the marketplace, and we had to make sure that we were comfortable stepping away from that and embracing Peacock, NBC, and the other partners, which we think will continue to provide great visibility to Big Ten basketball.
How is the exposure for Olympic sports on linear television changing with this deal?
I would say not dramatically. Fox has a commitment to continue to try and showcase our Olympic sports. NBC is interested in doing that as home of the Olympics. That's something, of course, that is more interesting to them than perhaps to some of the other networks. So we'll continue to kind of grow that out over time. BTN will continue to be the primary home of most of our Olympic sports, BTN Plus and BTN. But a couple of good things will happen, though. It'll be nice to see our women's basketball Big Ten tournament. The championship game will now be broadcast on national CBS and provide them some visibility that hasn't been present before. But then I know on some of the other sports as well, you think about Big Ten volleyball, Big Ten wrestling in particular, are two of the elite sport conferences in the country. I think those sports will see a lot of visibility as well. And so the networks will work over time. Of course, we're never going to say no if NBC comes to us and says, hey, we want to put wrestling on television. We're going to say, absolutely, that's great. So we'll work with them as we get settled into the rhythm here and figure out what makes the most sense.
Going from those cable BTN to like a CBS for those, women's championship games, NIL, how does that kind of play into going from kind of cable television out to national television?
I would hope on some level it will help our student athletes in terms of their branding and their opportunities. We're going to be involved with 3 of the most prominent traditional television networks in the history of media. When you think about Fox and CBS and NBC, and so no longer now will fans necessarily have to even have a cable package in order to be able to watch our teams compete. And so we're hopeful that the viewership will continue to escalate, and we've already seen that happen since we partnered with Fox 6 years ago. Big Noon has been the most watched college football program in the last 2 years. I think that's in large part due to the reputation and interest in Big Ten. We expect a similar uptick with our new partners as we move into that deal, and obviously the athletes who are competing on those platforms are going to gain, I think, additional notoriety and visibility by virtue of the platforms that they're now being found on.
How did you guys weigh the pros and cons of moving about 20% of that basketball inventory to a streaming only platform there?
Again, I think what we're trying to do at this moment in our time is to continue to push as much programming through the traditional linear networks as we can, understanding that that's where most of our fans still live. That's where they still consume their content. It's where they watch our games. But also recognizing that we need to continue to start to shift to a younger demographic, a demographic of people who are consuming our games differently. And so the streaming opportunities does that for us. It allows us to not jump perhaps both feet into the pool quite yet. I think we're still probably one, maybe two media negotiations away from the over-the-top really being the primary access point for our fans. But it does allow us to start to migrate a little bit into that space with an interest towards meeting our fans where they are. And we know that increasingly more and more of our fans are consuming content in that online space. And so we want to embrace that and put ourselves, I think, in a stronger position as we come back to the table in what'll be 5 years' time or so to have an established reputation and brand in that area so that we can engage in a productive negotiation this next time around.
Josh, regardless of how much money being reported that you guys are going to get, you are going to get more money. How will you decide how to use that money you guys get?
Well, the reality is a lot of it's already been spent, if you sit back and think about it. So the Alston program, for example, which we've put out some releases about, this is going to be an opportunity now for our student athletes to earn $5,980 per student athlete per year based on academic progress, eligibility, and their retention, them coming back and being part of our program. That program we anticipate is going to cost us somewhere around $3 million. That's something that we didn't have budgeted a couple of years ago. Obviously, it's a new development as a result of the Alston case last summer. As everybody has seen in your own lives, inflation continues to push prices up. Every time we get on an airplane, we get on a bus, we buy a meal, we stay in a hotel, all of those things, the costs of those things are up dramatically. If you look at our facilities projects, we have, as everybody knows, been very aggressive in the work that we've done in our facilities space. The short version is we've known that this was going to happen. We didn't know, of course, what the dollar figure was going to be, but we knew that there was a bubble that was coming on the revenue side, and we've anticipated that and budgeted accordingly. And so we expect that the money that will be coming in is already being put to very good use.
Josh, the 2023 football schedule is kind of not out there right now. From an Illinois vantage point, what would be your preferred kind of format for scheduling football going forward?
Well, there's two questions there. I think in 23, my hope is that it will look very much like a 22 schedule or a 21 schedule. I'm hopeful that in 23 we'll continue to see the divisions involved, that we'll just continue forward with a traditional rotation through the conference opponents on the east side. I think it's likely in 24 we'll see if there are any changes to happen, and I think that will happen in 24. It makes sense. That's the start of the full-fledged new media deal. So CBS next year is kind of a partial partner because they still have 1 year left on their SEC agreement, and so they won't be all the way in the mix, which is one of the reasons for the slow increase on the revenue side. But then obviously in 24 we're also starting to integrate USC and UCLA. So to me that's the year that makes sense if there are changes in the coming to see those implemented for the 24 season. And I don't know what that'll look like. And those are still very much active conversations between me and my colleagues across the league. But it's certainly something that we need to get resolved here relatively quickly.
What would you like? I mean, if you were able to design it, what would be the best thing for this school and maybe beyond?
You're trying to pin me down, Bob, and I'm not going to do it. I think that ultimately we have to do what's in the best interest of the Big Ten. And in part, I think that's going to have a lot to do with how many teams can we put into the playoff. And so to me, there's still some open questions about what that playoff is ultimately going to look like. Is it going to be 4 teams, 8 teams, 12 teams. Recently, we've even heard talk about 16 teams. And what are going to be the qualifying factors to gain access to that field. I think as a league, it's important to us to put a scheduling model together that puts us in the most advantageous position possible to fill that playoff with as many Big Ten schools as we can. And so that's, I think, ultimately going to be the crux of the conversation is how can we do that? How can we make sure that we're putting schools in the best position possible to access the postseason?
You mentioned the comparisons of NFL Sunday and college football Saturday. NFL in their negotiations, famously has the thing of it's not on TV unless it's a sellout, that type of thing. That there's Major League Baseball has blackouts. There's always that consideration of if it's too much TV, then there's no fans going to show up. With the declining, attendance across college football. Is there a concern there with this TV package that it becomes something that's, on a soundstage for television?
I don't know that I would say it's because of the increased television. Every football game has been on television for years now, and so we're not really in this new package offering anything new. We're just putting it in some different places than it has been previously. But certainly declining attendance is something that's very concerning to all of us, and something that we talk about regularly amongst the conference is what can we do to try and stem the tide and reverse that and try and get people back in the buildings, and something we talk about extensively here internal to the athletic program. I think that the bigger concern for me is still emerging from the pandemic. Did the pandemic just reinforce some of the trends that were already developing around people not coming into the buildings the way that they once did? And so we're still working very aggressively to try and pull people back out of their houses, help them feel comfortable, safe, and have an environment that we feel like they can enjoy in the building. And ultimately, what we have to do is try and create FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. And we want to make sure that when people come into Memorial Stadium, they understand that they're going to get an experience that they can't get by watching the game on television. And so we are very intentional and active in thinking about what does that day look like? How can we build that day out from the minute a fan gets in their car to come to our stadium till the minute they get back to the garage? What happens in those ensuing 8 hours or 12 hours or however long it might end up being to make this a place that they want to be and that they prioritize over all the other things that are pressing for their time. And it's just an ongoing effort, and there's going to be a lot of trial and error. There's going to be us attempting things, some of which may work, some of which may not. We'll find the things that stick and champion those, and we'll try new things as we go along.
Josh, I know some of the
Robert, did you follow?
Yeah, specifically coming out of COVID. Last year was the second lowest attendance in 75 years. Some of that is tied to people weren't ready to go out. There was mask requirements, everything else. So there's part of that in this. Coming out of that, what are the keys to, building that attendance up from the 35,000 last year?
I think it's a lot like what we're doing with the team itself. I think that anytime you're trying to change a cycle, it requires some pretty dramatic shocks to the system. And we're seeing that with our football program, is that as we try and change what has been a trajectory that isn't where we want it to be, that takes a dramatic shock to the system. Enter Brett Bielema and his coaching staff. And I think the same thing has to happen to our fan base, is we have to bring a shock to the system. And the biggest shock is going to be, and I mean this in the right sense, not a shock as in the terms of a surprise, but the shock in terms of the electricity and the energy it infuses into our fan base is going to be a successful football team. If we're able to go out there and have our guys compete at a high level, be in a lot of games in the fourth quarter, win their share, I think that's going to capture our fans' imaginations, get them excited, and then we need to supplement that with the things that are happening off the field and during breaks in the game. And I feel really good about what we do on that front and how we have some plans to continue to be progressive there. But at the end of the day, where we have been historically has put us in a challenging position from an attendance perspective, and we've got to change that on the field in order for it to change in the stands. And I think that what's exciting for me is you walk into State Farm Center across the street, best program in the Big Ten the last 3 years, couple championships to our name. It's evident that our fans are still there, right? I mean, the appetite is still there for Illinois sports. And so if we can capture similar energy with the football program that we have with the basketball program, I have every confidence that our fans will come back out the same way that they have on the hoop side.
Josh, you guys are gonna renegotiate, I think, before a couple other conferences. Was that something intentional, important to you, or was that just a byproduct of how the timeline laid out?
No, that was very intentional. I think that the Big Ten, we feel confident, again, in our brand. We feel confident in our place in the collegiate athletics landscape. And what we never want to do is be in a position where somebody else is setting an artificial market that we then are somewhat based on or judged on. And so by putting ourselves at the front of the line in the negotiating process, it allows us to set a true market for what Big Ten athletics is valued at that moment in history, instead of potentially allowing somebody else to set a market that might be artificially low compared to what we think we could get.
Josh, with all the changes, have there been any discussions about bowl affiliations, changes or additions?
Those conversations are ongoing. We're always evaluating our bowl lineup. Certainly as we get bigger, it will give us the opportunity to add some additional bowl games to the lineup. I do think that the postseason bowl experience is one of the many elements that are being discussed in the context of the CFP expansion. How can we expand the CFP while at the same time continuing to honor the tradition of postseason bowls in college football? And so we will always evaluate that lineup. It's generally our contracts, I think, are 5 or 6 year deals, and we try to line all those up in kind of the same order so that they all come up at about the same time. But it's been fun. Again, not unlike the television negotiations, the Big Ten brand carries a lot of weight. The bowl games want Big Ten schools to be involved, and so it puts us in a really positive position as we hit the bowl marketplace to really pick the geographic locations, the stadiums, the communities that we think will really embrace those games and get our fans excited.
All right, thanks, Josh.
Thanks, everybody.